What's up, guys? Today I'm just going to show you my comic process and how I set up my page layouts and just what I do. First thing I want to do is set up my boxes and text. Usually I have a script and I'll just copy and paste the script over here. What I like to do for my boxes is I have an outline shape and then I make this like gray shape. Usually I'll take the select tool and go over here and fill out the boundaries. And this is going to help me later because I'll be able to copy and paste backgrounds. So once you get your text, just kind of making sure I got all the flow I wanted. I'd say just keep it loose, try to do a lighter color. Once you get your roughs, we're going to do a clean outline sketch. And then what I'll do is you'd make a new layer, press B for brush, and then usually choose like a dark outline color. I like to keep my outlines a lot darker, so I turn up my flow to around 66. Usually the default is around 20, and that just means you can make more passes. And I already did my outlines, so I'll show you how that looks over here. So this is kind of the outline phase, and then next I'm going to start doing color. So for the color, I made a new layer over here called a color layer. If you press G, you're going to have fill, and then on my libraries I have my color swatches. So I'll click here. So right now I'm just blocking out all the colors, and then when you're doing your outline phase, you really want to make sure all the lines are at least closed off, and this will make your life a lot easier. And the reason why I turn my flow on to like super high is so that I don't have to worry about the little fringes between the line works. Oh, one thing I want that helps you out a lot. So if you notice right here, I have my text over my color. So just make sure you turn your text off, at least for now, and hide it, because you're going to start coloring and then it's not going to show up where the text is. Very frustrating to fix it after you think you've got all your color down. I got most of the rough colors down, and it looks alright for now. And essentially when I'm coloring, I want to make sure that I'm getting like the main like objects, like foreground objects and characters. And as far as the backgrounds, I don't want to focus on that just yet. And I'll show you why in a sec. When I fill, it doesn't really fill it in completely. So under my color, I'm going to create a new layer. And this will be like the back colors. And essentially, the purpose of this is just to fill in the gaps. So I'm going to take a dark color, probably like this brown over here, and then all I'm going to do is just a tiny bit of cleanup. You don't have to really be perfect on this, like this part, but any place where you think it's going to be super dark and like you don't want, like if there's like a lighter color underneath and you don't want that to show like the line fringe, that's where like this part is important. And essentially you're just kind of filling in the rough gaps. There's a little bit of gaps here and there, but honestly it won't matter too much. I'm going to turn on my background layer, and for the most part it's fine. I'm happy enough. On the side where it shows color and back color, what I'm going to do is I'm going to shift click. So I'm going to click color, shift, and then click back color. I'm going to right click and say duplicate layer. And then I'm going to duplicate both of these, and where it's the copied version, I'm going to go right click and I'm going to merge layer. And so essentially I just created a mask for all my colors. With this color copy, I'm going to call it shading. And then this little button right over here, I'm going to click that. And essentially what's going to let me do is that I can color anything of this. I can go outside the layer mask and I'll still color within the boundaries. If I don't have that on, I'll color everything and it's going to be a mess. So I'm going to click this again right over here. And then I'm going to take like a nice purple, and I'm going to take a hard brush and increase the hardness, increase the size, and then I'm just going to color everything a nice dark purple. Essentially this is how I'm going to be shading everything through this layer mask. And this is where you kind of want to make sure that there's no gaps, because if there's like a little hole in the purple, you won't be able to shade in that area. Just do a quick look, make sure you're happy with how it is, and then what you're going to do is you're going to duplicate it 2 more times. Duplicate, and this is going to be my texture color, and I'm going to turn this into a more blue, so image, adjustment, hue and saturation, and I'm just going to shift it over to more of a blue color, turn up the lightness. Alright, and then this is going to be my lighting layer. So image, hue and saturation, I'm going to bring up the lightness, and I'm going to do like a pink light. Alright, so I'm going to hide these, and I'm going to start with the shading first. I'm going to click here, and under blending mode, I'm going to do multiply, and then I'm going to bring this down to 80. So around 82 is how I like it. So I got everything in a nice shadow. Down here, I'm going to create a new mask right over here. I'm going to click that, and now I have a layer mask. So I'm going to click this white piece of sheet over here, press B for pen, click my black color. I usually have this square brush that I use to paint in my lights. I'm going to turn my opacity down to maybe like 50, and I'm just going to block in my lights really quick. Essentially, I try to keep this phase really simple because my outlines do most of the work. So as long as my lighting kind of makes sense, I can get away with being pretty sloppy in my lighting. So usually what I like to do is I like to light things where I want to put emphasis on the panel. Lighting things properly is important, but the way I want to light is show like where you want the viewers to draw their eyes to. So usually the faces I'll make brighter, and then things that are like more back, for instance right here, he's a little too bright. I want to push him back into the scenery a little bit more. So you just kind of want to focus on that. Once I get my block colors, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go down here, and this is just a smudge brush, and I'm going to smudge all my lighting. And this will just help blend everything in a little bit more. Really just kind of do it to your liking, honestly. Go back to my lighting, and then I'm going to start rim lighting a lot of my characters. So I'm going to make sure my brush is black. That's how I make everything brighter. What I'm going to do is I'm going to rim light the shadow area, and this will just help make everything pop. For this side of the rim light, I want to be slightly darker, so I'm going to lower my opacity and just rim light over here. Just kind of make everything pop just a tiny bit more. And then on the edges of his scarf, give it a nice rim light. You don't want to overdo it, but it's a good way to make things pop from like scenes that are super dark. And that's looking pretty good. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do the texture. So I'm going to turn this layer on. He's back to blue. I'm going to go to multiply, bring this down to 80, and then I'm going to create another layer mask. So right here, click that button, and then if you do Control I, everything's going to be hidden until I paint with white. And everything that I paint with white is going to show. And then I have some texture brushes. I use Mark Burnett's texture pack and Jinxing's texture, and those have been working pretty well for me. I also have this triangle texture brush. I'll show you guys how to make brushes later in a different video. I kind of treat this as extra shading. I just go really quick with it. I don't really have a set process with this yet. If you take a screen tone brush and turn down the opacity, that's been helping me get a little bit of cool textures. I use a lot of flat colors, and the purpose of this is to help break up some things. I also have this like dash line. This is good for like ambient occlusion shadings where like between these little lines. That's a good place to add this brush. And then I also use this as like contour. So I'll go along the shape of the shape of the character, and this helps kind of give them a little bit of contour. The nice thing about this process is that I can build up values and pretty fast, and I have a lot of control. I'm pretty happy with that. Over here, this is going to be my light channel. It's the same thing, it's light pink. You're going to go down here again, and then you're going to click that masking. Down in blending mode, you're going to do soft light, and usually you kind of do it to your preference. I like to turn it to 80, and then I'm going to click this white square right over here, and then Control I, and that's going to invert it. And essentially, I'm going to do the exact same process as I do with the textures. At this point, I'm really just trying to paint in where I want people to like shine. I like to do just a little bit more rim light. It kind of makes everything glow a little bit more. You just got to make sure that if you're changing colors, you do it on the color layer and not the shading layer. I have my shading and color done. I already made this background. Essentially, I try to make this background the size of one of my pages. And you just want to make sure you have like a background that if you can zoom in, it won't be blurry. You know, they're only going to go in these tiny boxes. Press new layer, and then you're going to press Alt. And you want to make sure it looks, that icon's there too, that arrow pointing down. And then what I'm going to do is, I already exported my background, but I'm just going to drag it in. Essentially, I'm going to use the same background for everything. So right here, create a new layer and do the same thing. There's this box over here, and that means I can't edit the layer. So I do raster size layer, and now I can start editing on it again. I'm going to delete that. And then under that layer, I'm going to go back to my background, drag another copy of it. Like, sometimes it's wonky, but it makes everything done faster. And that's kind of what's important, because you do want to focus on quality, but you don't want that quality to really take over your life, and you're working on like hundreds and hundreds of panels. You gotta cut some corners. Usually what I do next is, so it doesn't look as obviously like copy and pasted, first I'm going to merge everything together. I want to blur out some stuff. So usually what I'll do is I'll take the lasso tool, I'll put the feather around like 50, and then feather out the background. Add a little bit more. Alright, and then you go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian, and then I'm going to blur it maybe around 2.5. So what I'm doing here is I'm keeping the background blurred, but I want this foreground to be a little bit sharper. But then I also want to do another layer of blur for like the top trees and like things that are going to be more in the distance. That's where you want to apply the second blur. So like right around here, that's not as important information. Filter, Blur, Gaussian, and I'm going to do maybe 3. There you go. So now you have this gradient blur, and this dude right here, I'm going to blur him again, because why not? So I'm going to click that, Filter, Blur, Gaussian, and make him blurry. There you go. So now I got this cinematic blur. And then I'm going to kind of do the same thing over here. Because it's motion, if I go to blur, motion blur, there we go. And it also helps provide impacts and whatnot. So that's the rough background. And now what I'm going to do is we're going to start to do the actual backgrounds, and this will help tie it down together. So I'll create a new layer up here, press Alt to make sure it's over, and just like my color, I'm going to like start to mask out what I want painted. So, and then for simplicity's sake, I'm going to turn off the backgrounds, and I'm just going to fill in the colors. So I'm going to make sure nothing's selected, and then I'm just going to press the fill tool and fill out everything. I can't stress how important it is to, at least doing comics, just making sure your line work's clean. That way, when you go to fill colors, it's not as much as a hassle. And then color the white impact. If I turn back my layer, you know, that's not bad. So now if I go under, if I turn that off, and now there's two things I can do from here. Is I can repaint it, but sometimes when you're doing comics, you're repainting the same thing over and over again. So sometimes I'll go back to my older frames, and then this wood layer, I kind of like how that's textured, and I'll just copy and paste it, Control C, and then I'll go back to my other layer, and then I'll turn on Let's see. What I'll do, I'll press Control V, I'll move it, I'll size it how I want it. There is an easier way. I'll select this with the magic wand, go here to this texture over here, select inverse, delete, and then you got your texture over here. And then I'll merge these two together, and now I have this rough texture without doing too much. I'm going to turn on this color lock, and I'm going to paint just a little bit. I want this to be more dark, and then where like the orange eggs, I'm just going to paint that in, and it's already starting to come through a little bit more. Get the little highlights, little shadows. And once again, it's a background, so you want to spend some time on it, but also you don't want to get caught on such a small section, because that's so small that I'm just going to paint this normally. I'm going to make sure my layer select is on. I'm just going to paint it. I'm going to grab some colors around too. Turn down my opacity. It's nice orange. Bring in just a little bit of cool colors for the shadows. And it's coming together pretty well. So I'm pretty happy how that turned out. So now that I got the foreground elements, because there's no shadows on them, it kind of looks like they're floating. So what I'll do from here, so these are the front trees, and then this will be the shadow layer. And there's two ways you can do it. You can either paint directly on this background layer with the multiply brush, or you can just do what we do with the shading. Sometimes I do it both ways. If I'm unsure on the scene, then I'll just make a new layer. That way I'm not destroying all my progress. So I'll do multiply and then color with the dark purple. I'll just get them down there, and you kind of just want to establish shadow. So as far as my lighting, I'm going to soften up the edges too while I'm at it. So I'll take my eraser, and then I'll turn down the hardness, bring up that, and then I'll turn down my opacity too, and just make it fade just a tiny bit. And that way it doesn't look as harsh. You kind of just want to feather out the edges. There you go. That's helping. And then finally I'll just turn down the opacity. Yeah. So I'm pretty happy how that turned out. So for this bottom part, what I'm going to do is I want some white lines streaking across. So I'll take my outline brush, turn it to white, and I'll just do a little bit of streaks here and there, and that will help give it motion. And this part, I'm kind of like drawing along the contours too, and that kind of helps sell that it's not just a 2D shape, it's like a three-dimensional object, even though it is pretty cartoony the way I draw everything. So now I have my slime. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make some little dust particles. So I'll call this dust. I would highly suggest just getting like a dust brush, but essentially just a bunch of little circles that you can draw on. Turn your color to white, and we're just going to draw random dusts everywhere. It's a lot easier. I would say just go heavy with it, because you can always delete later. This is a nice effect to throw on like glowing stuff too. And then I'm going to go to my eraser brush and turn my opacity down to a little bit lower. And then I'm going to erase some of my dust that I made. Usually I like to erase it on the characters and like have it heavy on the backgrounds. But this will just give everything a little bit more balance. And then I'm going to go back to this gradient layer. I'm going to press G and select. And I'm going to turn off all these check marks. That way I select everything. And then I'm going to go to my gradient tool. And for my lighting, I want like a purple and a blue. I'll drag this across. And then I'm going to turn the shading to like 80%. And then I'm going to do soft light. There you go. Alright, so 52, that's good enough. And then, now what I'm going to do now is for each of these panels, I'm going to select this, and then, make sure you turn on this layer lock. And then, yeah, I'm essentially going to help this push back background details and push up foreground details. I like to turn off auto select off because it's pretty annoying because you're going to be grabbing things you don't want to grab. And then I like to do show transform controls because That way I can make text bigger, and I'm just going to be putting the text in like all the spots that are not too intrusive, and just make sure it's like legible and that fits with the composition. Alright, so now that I got my text, what I'm going to do is under all my text, this will be the word bubbles. Go to white, press B, and then I like to use my sharp render brush. It's just a square brush. And now I'm gonna put it behind all my text and just draw it in. Alright, go back to my word bubbles, and now I'm gonna make the tails. So I'm gonna press B, and then got a clean sketch. There we go. And then just make my tails. I like to give it a little squiggly because it gives it some character. Alright, so I think for the most part I like how this turned out. I'm pretty happy with this page. So yeah, I'm pretty much done. Normally I don't save it with the background because just in case I want to cut it up for Webtoons, it's a lot easier. I don't have to deal with the background. And then I'll put, when I do piece everything together, I'll throw it in InDesign. So as far as simplicity's sake, I would say just keep it as a transparent PNG. That way, for future projects, it's a lot easier to import it. But yeah, that's the quick process of how I do my comics. There's probably way better ways of doing it, but I hope this helped y'all, and have a good day.